Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Divine here, and today we are taking a look at 20 things you should know prior to the launch of New World. So these are just going to be little tips and tricks, things that I think you should know just prior to playing the game. All right, so firing right into tip one, and that's going to be enabling PvP actually does give you a 5% increase in experience. Now, while this might not be that much, and it might not be worth it for some to risk just getting constantly killed out in the world, it is good to know that you can get a little bit of a boost in your experience by doing this. Alright, so tip number 2 is going to be using the left control, and this allows you to self-cast healing spells on yourself. So just a little tip, I know there's a little dialogue box that does come up when you're casting some sort of healing spell, but sometimes it just goes away so quickly that you just don't even see it, so that's how you do that. Alright, so moving on to tip 3, and that's going to be for early on game stuff. So after you've made all your flint tools, what you'll need to do is gather 152 iron ore, 88 green wood, 36 rawhide, and 8 fibers for a new set of full iron tools. Now these tools are going to be a little bit more beneficial to you, so just be on the lookout for those mats early on so that you can complete your whole new tool set. Alright, so tip number 4 is going to be, where do you find linen? And that's going to be from these plants called hemp, and these are all going to be near a lot of the different starting areas. I think almost every starting area has some of these plants. Early on, when this game does first launch, it's going to be hard to find those plants, so just plan accordingly. Finding linen is going to be a little bit more difficult. Alright, so moving on to tip 5, and that is, where do you find saltpeter? Now, this is found in all the caves kind of littered around the world, basically, and it's going to be a little bit harder to find a lot of the times just because it's kind of like buried into the ground, and the animation screen to like collect that doesn't really show up until you're actually physically looking at it and almost like on top of the node itself. So just be aware of that when you're in the caves. Just kind of look at the ground and you'll probably see these little white patches, and there you can collect the saltpeter. Alright, and the next tip is going to be tip number 6, and that is, when you're 10 levels or higher than a monster, your window of aggression of that monster is drastically reduced. And it's drastically reduced to something like 10 yards or somewhere around there. So when you're a lot higher level and you're going back to those early on levels to maybe get some supplies or something like that, you can get a lot closer to those monsters or not even have to worry about them while you're gathering those mats. So just keep that in mind. Alright, so for tip number 7, unfortunately I don't have a video clip of this, but while you're fishing, after you catch the fish and you're reeling it in, you usually have to go and show it to everybody. But if you left click and just cast out again, it'll actually put the fish away and let you just continue fishing quicker. So you're not constantly stopping and pulling out the fish every time and having to wait for him to put it in your backpack before you move on. Alright, so tip number 8 is going to go over Azoth. Now, be aware that this caps at 1,000, and you can get this stuff by questing, harvesting, or killing monsters. Now, questing will give you the most, but killing monsters, I want to just mention that monsters over the level 30 mark will actually grant you 10 Azoth just randomly, and then monsters over the level 50 mark will actually grant you 15. So just kind of be aware of this when you're killing those little higher level monsters. Alright, moving straight into tip 9, and this is going to be over those blue pages that you see littered across the world that actually give you some early on experience. Now, they only give you like 60 experience, like 40 to 60 I believe, but you can add these quickly to your journal by pressing T without actually having to open up and read them. So that was actually a tip I learned not too long ago, so I wanted to share it with you guys. Alright, and tip 10 is going to be over changing factions. Now, this can be done, but you do have a cooldown of 120 days before you can switch factions. But also know that when you're switching factions, you cannot join the most dominant faction on your server. So keep this in mind. If you are already on that dominant faction, just be a little bit aware that you can't go back if you switch, even if you wait the 120 days. Alright, and tip number 11 coming real quick, and that's, how do you learn a recipe? And that is done by salvaging the recipe. So don't worry, guys, I know it's kind of weird to just salvage it, but that is how you learn a new recipe. Alright, so tip number 12 is going to be, where do you find a cheap house? And all the starting areas but Everfall have a cheap house for at least 2,500 gold. But please be aware this price can go down, I think all the way to 2,000 depending on what territory standing rewards you do pick. Okay, so tip number 13. So when your faction owns multiple different territories, if you have items in your storage shed across these territories, you can actually transfer them between storage sheds. Well, this does come at a price, but it can be done, and it is a nice time saver instead of having to teleport over there or run all the way over to different towns. All right, so tip number 14 is over shields. Now, I feel like these got a little bit misunderstood, and when you equip a shield, you don't actually get the stats unless you're actively using the shield with a weapon. So it's actually more beneficial not to have a shield on your character and get that weight reduction instead. All right, so tip number 15 is about respecking. So at level 20, it's going to cost you 20 gold to respec, but every level you gain, it costs you an additional 12 gold. So at 21, you were at 32 gold to respec. So keep this in mind for higher levels. It can kind of get a little bit expensive. All right, tip number 16 coming in is how do you gain more storage space in your storage shed other than the territory standing cards? And that is going to be adding a storage chest to your house. Now there's 4 tiers to this, and it can go from 200 to 500 extra storage space you can get. So keep that in mind, especially in the higher level houses. You can actually get some pretty nice little perks out of the house. So tip number 17, and that is how do you create higher level tools for lower level players? So things like star metal pickaxes or something like that, if you want to have that be able to be used by someone under level 40, what you do is actually use poorer quality secondary ingredients. So things like green wood or timber instead of the higher level wood pieces in that recipe you would use, and that would actually bring down the gear score quite a bit. So the lowest I've seen it drop is about 3 levels. So just keep that in mind when you're making different gear. Some of that stuff could probably go for quite a bit in the auction house. All right, so moving on to tip number 18, and that is going to be about the towns. Now, every town has a faction supply cart. So if your faction actually owns the territory that the town is in, you have the ability to go to the town and actually get a unique faction supply cart. So just try to make sure to take advantage of this when you can. All right, so tip number 19 is going to be over chat settings. Now you hit this little cog and you can actually filter on and off what channels you want to be a part of. But there's also a secondary cog here that you can actually change message fade delays or text size or the background itself. Now I keep my fade delay on 0, so when messages come through, they instantly start to fade away and I'm not overwhelmed with so many messages on half my screen. All right, and so for our last tip for this video is how do you skip the tutorial, which a lot of people didn't realize you could do. So you actually go by hitting escape, then going up to game menu, and then you can hit skip to new world. But a couple things to note while doing this is you won't get the sword mastery point if you skip early, and you also won't get the shield that you obtain in the tutorial section. So just be a little bit aware of this before you go ahead and skip that tutorial. All right, again, I want to thank you guys for taking the time to watch this video. Hopefully it gave you a few tips that maybe you didn't know and will get you ready for when the game launches. Now, if you like this video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe down below, and I will see you guys in the next one.